Yeah, hello, and also a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where the planet you are from my side. My name is Stefan Winter, and I'm happy to tell you everything about eduroam managed IDP today. So the intended audience of this webinar is national roaming operators. So I will do all of us a favor and skip telling you what eduroam is in the first place and what an eduroam IDP is. And we will instead jump straight into the topic of what is specifically eduroam managed IDP. So let's get started here and answer the question, is eduroam managed IDP and who is it for? Now, being an eduroam national roaming operator, when you onboard a new IDP, typically they will ask you what do we have to do? And the role model answer is, well, you need to install a radio server and connect it to your identity management backend. In a way, this is the only and proper answer to give because that is how eduroam works. You do need the radius protocol, you do need an identity management backend. So for a very long time, this is the answer we've been given. However, if you think about this and reflect for a bit, this on the surface simple answer is actually asking quite a task from the person doing it. Because if you want to actually become the IDP, first of all, you have to have a identity management backend. So we're talking about an Active Directory, an LDAP, maybe you have a MySQL database or something else, but you have to have it in the first place. Then you need to know and understand the radius protocol. You have to deploy a radius server, and you have to configure it so that it will actually connect with this backend to verify users as they want to access eduroam. You have to sustain the operations, meaning setting up the radio server is fine, but patching it for the next 5, 10, 15 years as the protocol evolves, as versions of the software evolve, and so on, also needs to be taken into account. So you need to have the personnel who understands this software and have to retain that personnel. So it's not like it's impossible, and large organizations like, say, a university with 10,000 people certainly can do that. But what we've been worrying over time a bit more is that if you are a small organization, and small is really something you can define as you like, but as soon as you're less than 3 digits or maybe maximum 200 persons, maybe the effort you have to put into the radio server, into the connection to the IDM backend and so on, maybe this cost is actually too high for you. And you either don't have the money to operate it, or you don't have the human resources in your IT to operate it. Or maybe you just don't have an IT team in the first place if you're really small. For a very long time, we as eduroam said, well, that's too bad then. Without a radio server, you can't do eduroam because this is D1-based technology. So, well, come back when you're bigger and when you can actually sustain operations. This is, of course, not the nicest answer to give. So for a long while, we have been struggling how to improve on that. So what we have come up with is eduroam managed IDP, which closes exactly this gap. It offers these small organizations a quick, safe, and cost-effective way to offer eduroam. And the way we do that is we're doing away with local hosting of all the radios. We are putting that into what people today call the cloud. So what we have is a cloud-based eduroam IDP infrastructure. We run it on behalf of the IDP. So this is a multi-tenant system. We keep it secure. We keep managing it as the eduroam operations team so that the IDP doesn't have to do any of that. The system is also designed for high availability. It is hosted in several separate data centers. It has 24/7 oversight with monitoring plays and so on. And we keep shepherding and caring about it on a day-to-day basis. And the best thing is the last bullet, actually, because none of these above 3 things are visible in any way to the administrator. The institution admin simply sees a web browser window, logs in, creates users, sees how they use eduroam, deprovisions users, and despite being able to use a web browser, nothing has to be known by the institution in question. Now, before we dive into how to use the system, I would first like to tell you how it actually works behind the scenes, because you are NROs, you do know the technology, and I hope I can put a bit of technical detail on you. So first of all, the system we have issues eduroam credentials based on client certificates. The IdP type is called IdP TLS, and which is actually the best available technology we have for user credentials. Notably, there is no password involved. There is a passphrase which never leaves the user device. So if there is no password, it can't be stolen. And actually, this is also used across the system. This is our paradigm. We don't want to have any passwords anywhere. So when the system is being used, of course, you have to log in as an administrator. You do that via EduGain or via a social provider. But we don't store any local passwords from an admin. We also don't store any local passwords or actually the private key to the certificates for the end users. Nothing of that is on our infrastructure. We provision it, we verify it, but we don't store it. Now, if you hear EPLS and client certificates, you will realize that, oh, there is some heavy lifting infrastructure in the backend. So what you need to have for this type is a certification authority, CA. We have that infrastructure in place, and we have built it so that we can grow in several dimensions. So we have built it so that we can scale it to all of eduroam. In fact, it is pre-provisioned for just about 200 top-level domain prefixes. So all the current and hopefully many of the future eduroam national roaming operators which come into existence can immediately start using that. Don't have to worry about anything. The other dimension we have is that we also have partitionability in mind, meaning that we can serve these 200 NROs. But if there is something specific and one NRO says, okay, do a part of the job, but I would like to keep some elements local to myself, then we can also split out and say, okay, we serve everything minus one, and the one NRO gets its part of the infrastructure itself. Actually, I will talk about that in the next slides. Then we also have radio servers, of course, which do the actual authentication. And here we have set up radio servers which are configured according to all the best practices we have in the eduroam service definition in Europe. So if you're not in Europe, you probably have your own service definitions in your world region. But the one we have in Europe is the one we've been refining for the last, let's say, 15 years. And it really contains everything we know and every advice we have on how to actually run a radio server. So all of the things we have defined there are in the system. Lastly, we are hosted in Europe, so we've been thinking about GDPR and protection of private data quite a bit. So we've designed the system so that it is as privacy conserving as possible. We use a double blinding pseudonymization. So there is the actual user. The administrator only tells us a pseudonym of that. We don't want to know the real name. And from that pseudonym of the user, when we create the client certificates, there is again a second level of pseudonymization. So when the credential is actually used on the wireless, on the medium with an eduroam SP, nothing can be derived about the individual that is using eduroam. Even if you have two devices with you as the same person, these would be two different client certificates, two different credentials, two different usernames as seen by the eduroam SP. To be honest, this I think is the best we can do because, as you well know, eduroam in principle is a network which has to be able to identify an end user in case of abuse. So there is a way back, so we can undo the pseudonymization with the help of the identity provider. And the identity provider can then sanction the end user. We, as the operator, only and always operate on those pseudonyms. So, looking at what do you have to do as an NRO? I've been speaking suspiciously little about NROs. It was always about the IdPs themselves. And that is because your role is that pretty much of a facilitator. You're a man in the middle in the eduroam architecture, just like you are with a normal IdP. So the actual service is with the IdP. But as an NRO, first of all, you have to identify which organizations in your service region are actually eligible for eduroam, and with that for eduroam managed IdP. And well, once you talk to those small organizations, you're also the one who should talk to them that this solution exists and they can make use of it. And you basically tell us as the platform operators that this particular person you're inviting there is actually authorized to become an IdP in eduroam. We would also appreciate if you could assist as a first level responder in case of problems. So if the IdP admin for some reason doesn't figure out how to log into the system, it would be great if you could give them a head start and tell them how the basic system works. And that's basically it. Once you choose you want to use the system, it's important to stress that nothing in this system happens without your own permission and without you wanting it. So even when I said we have pre-provisioned the system with 200 NROs, yes, the technical infrastructure is there, but so long as you don't actually log into the system and activate your first IdP, your first managed IdP, your NRO is not visible anywhere and for the outside world doesn't exist. It's just that, let's say the bid is made, you can come in anytime and start using it, but if you don't, you don't. And if you don't have any IdPs, when you do log in and when you do use the system, you have a dedicated control panel. So first of all, you can configure how you appear in the system. You have a name for NRO, logo, and so on. You have the authorization control for IdPs. You can create new IdPs. You can delete IdPs. You can change the administrators in case there was a change of personnel in the IdP. And finally, you can also see statistics for how was the uptake of the system in your service region. Now, before we dive into the details on how you actually do that, let's talk a bit about the deployment options you have. So as I said, we've built this system to be able to slice off parts of the operations to yourselves in the NRO. So you choose how much of the system remains in the shared hands in the cloud that we have. And basically, there are 4 levels how we can break down the system. The first and actually default one, my system would be hosted at Roger. This is so far what every NRO has. Someone is knocking. So in this default model of operations, we're happy to accommodate your NRO with up to 10,000 end users per NRO. As you recall, this is meant for small institutions, and if we take the 200 mark as the maximum size we would think people want to use the system for, then this means you can have 500 organizations with each a size of 200 people. And I think that's actually quite a bit, 50, sorry. So 50 organizations with the maximum size, or many more organizations with a smaller size. If you grow beyond that, we have to look at the options on how to share the load with you. And these are the following bullets, basically. So one thing you can do, and you may want to do that if you feel you need to have the service closer to you, is that you leave the user interface and the certification authority with us in the cloud, but the actual end user authentication, meaning the radio server in the system, is handled locally by you. That is something we are prepared for. We can do this anytime, and it's prepared for in the code. So there is no issue with that. We also have a further breakout level, which is you could leave the UI with Gent, but the actual certificate generation is something you want to do yourself, and the radio server also something you want to do yourself. We are also prepared to do that. I've put this bullet in parentheses for the simple reason that this means we have to write some code. Both we have to do that to accommodate your CA, and your certification authority also has to have an API so that we can actually talk to each other. So this is a bit more involved, but if you want to have the control over your CA, that is something you can do. So there's no issue with that. And finally, the last bullet point is possibly also interesting. We've already had 2 NROs exploring this option and actually deploying that. Since this is all open source code, you can just take the entire system and put it on your own hosts. So we're talking about at least 4 VMs you have to run, some of which are just PHP. Another one would be the certification authority part. Another one would be the radio server part. So if you want to, you can take all that with you from GitHub and install it. We already have extensive installation manuals. I would just like to give you a word of caution. There are quite a few moving parts in here, so setting it up is not as trivial as just getting the source code and pushing deploy. You have to actually get the entire system as a package up and running, and it's more than PHP. So it's going to be a bit of work, but as Exchange, you can then host the entire system yourself and are not dependent on the end. Now, this webinar today is merely talking about this first option. So for the remainder of this webinar, we'll be looking at how does the system look when we deploy it for you, and you basically are in a hands-off position, and you just facilitate for the IDPs, and then they just use the system as we provide it. Now, this is a good moment to take a short look at the chat. Well, actually, if I find it.
Stefan, thank you very much. I think we're okay. I don't think we have any questions that we need to address straight away. People were quite accommodating about the banging. I like Herr Nilsson's comment that a Jerome cat requires carpentry.
Yeah, that's quite funny, actually.
But otherwise we're okay at the moment, so if you want to continue, and then we'll check the questions later on.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Irina. Right, so then let's continue. So let's imagine you do want to use the system and in its cloud-hosted way. Your first question is probably, so how do I get started? How do I sign up as an NRO to the system, and how do I prepare operations? So that's actually two fairly simple things to do. First of all, the NRO sign up is basically an award for you if you are already registered with the Eduroam operations support systems. So if we know about you in terms of being in the Eduroam database as NRO personnel, and if you have activated your account by clicking a certain link you've received many years ago, then all is already set. And as a rule of thumb, Eduroam CAT and Eduroam Managed IDP use the same code base, and they use the same authorization system. So if you are already a user of Eduroam CAT, you just don't have to do anything. You can just log into Eduroam Managed IDP, and we automatically and immediately recognize you. So in that case, the only thing you have to do is visit the entry page, which I've put at the end of this slide. If you realize right now that, oh, I am an NRO, but I'm not in the Eduroam database, I don't know how to activate my account, you can also visit that first link above. It's in the Eduroam wiki, and there is a specific page telling you how to access Eduroam operations support services. Once you follow the instructions there, you can get started and use the system here. So when you're in, this is the front page of the system. If you have used Eduroam CAT, you will see, okay, this looks remarkably different. Eduroam CAT is a system where the end user is presented with this central page here, and then he has to select which institution he's from. Eduroam Managed IDP is very different. End users never visit the URL you are using as an administrator. So this front page here has a button only saying administrator login to make clear that this is, if you came here as an end user, you've done something wrong. In fact, end users only get deep links into the system, which already identify the user and bring him straight to the download page for his personal installer. So it is on the same domain, it's on the same host, but going to the front page is only something for administrators. Everybody else, the end users, have to use the deep link they get via some invitation means, let's say via email. So you can log in as an administrator with whatever means you usually use to log in. And once you've done that, you will see an interface which really looks identical to CAT. Eduroam CAT is really a very close sibling here. As a national roaming operator, there will be a button for you, which is called click here for national roaming operator management tasks. And once you push that, you get to your federation overview. And yeah, just like in Eduroam CAT, there is an edit button, and you can edit various properties like uploading the logo and name and your URL. You know all that from Eduroam CAT if you've been there lately. There are only two things which are specific to Eduroam Managed IDP, two options you don't see in Eduroam CAT. And one of those is the maximum users per profile setting. So this basically allows you as the NRO to control how many users is a managed IDP allowed to have. I've always been talking about 200, also in my previous slides. That's the default we use if you don't specify a number here. But if you say everybody who is bigger than 50 users has to use his own radio server, and I don't want anybody who's bigger than that to use managed IDP, you can set this to 50. If you're more confident and say it's 300, it's 300. We have no limits here. The only thing we have for the cloud hosted solution is that as an NRO in total, 10,000 end users, which are currently active in the system, is pretty much the limit we can bear in terms of operations, because there's also quite some heavy lifting for us. So by making this number smaller, you can have more institutions inside. By making it bigger, you should take more attention. There is also a second button, and that is not even currently used, so you can ignore it for the time being. But that is used for when the NRO says, I will want to have my own radio servers, I want to do the authentication myself, you can do the UI at the CA, that's fine. But I want to authenticate my own users. There is the question, should we be a backup for you and still be able to authenticate you if something local to you breaks? Or do you want to have the full and single control of authenticating users? And this is a button for the future where you can say, okay, I don't want you to be a backup. So totally and immediately turn off everything. I will do all this myself. Okay, so the default is off and it doesn't have any effect right now anyway. So that's basically it. And to be honest, it's safe to leave both options at the defaults and just start with the defaults here. And that's actually it. So once you've taken a look at the basic settings, you're good to go. So one of the things you may want to do once you have set up yourself in the system is to onboard a new IDP for managed IDP. And that is also quite straightforward. Basically, the most important thing is that you tell users or tell administrators of the IDPs what this system does for them and where their own responsibility lies. And that is something when you discuss this with the IDP, you should make clear before you actually do the onboarding. So the rule of thumb is that we can take the burden of the technical operation of an IDP away from the admin, but all the administrative aspects around being an Eduroam IDP remain with the institution. So with our system, institutions can create the users, they can change users, they can provision credentials for the users and manage those. They can get status information about how extensively is the user using it, where is he roaming, and so on. And they have the ability to identify the user in case of abuse. That's all infrastructure we provide. However, on the outset, everything beyond the technical infrastructure is their thing. So they are still the ones who have to decide who of your users, of the users is allowed to use Eduroam. So who do they give an account to? And they should be consistent in that regard and be wary of not giving out to strangers and so on. And when they have provisioned Eduroam to an end user, they also have to accept that they're still liable for the end user. When this end user has done some significant abuse and we get a request to disable an account or something, we can't do that because we can't identify who the individual is. We can only get to the actual username as provisioned in the system. But the ultimate liability for the end user lies with the administrator. So if sanctioning involves talking to the person, that's one thing. Disabling the account, it's another thing. These are things, these are decisions only the administrator can take for his end users. So long as that is clear, you can happily invite institutions to the system. And if you've ever used Eduroam Cat, you will also realize how to do that because it's identical to what you do in Eduroam Cat. On the National Roaming Operator Overview page, there is a button called Register a New Identity Provider. And when you do that, you get a pop-up and it asks you, okay, is your IDP already in the Eduroam database or not? What is the name? In which NRO should it be created? And please give me the email of the future administrator. You've seen all that, so there's nothing special if you've ever used Cat. So you can send the invitation, and that is pretty much all. as an NRO, you have now given the IDP the opportunity to use Azure Managed IDP. Everything from then on is in principle their thing. I just have one more slide, actually 2 more slides, one more slide with the invitation itself. So the invitation gets sent from us by email, and the administrator just has to click on this sign up link, which has a really very long token for the activation. It's valid for 24 hours. So when you negotiate, okay, I'm signing up, somebody on the other end should actually pick it up and register. But if the person just had an accident and couldn't redeem the invitation, you can also resend it after the timeout if they missed that 24-hour window. Now, when they click on the link, the first thing they have to do, and like I said, this is out of your hands, but still you might do some hand-holding there, they have to authenticate to the Azure Operation Support systems. This is done with normal single sign-on and edugain typically, and you as an NRO probably have edugain, so you use that to log in. However, we're specifically targeting small organizations here, which means probably if they're not capable of setting up a radio server, they're also not capable of setting up a SAML single sign-on server, so they're probably not part of edugain. So a common question we expect here is, so I see thousands of universities, how I can log into the system, but mine is not here and my organization is not here. It's then useful to remind them that there is also the tab about social networks, and they can log into the system using Google, using LinkedIn, and whatnot we have on this other tab. So I do think we can get everybody on board. So that's not a problem, but this is maybe something people ask for and you may have to explain. Now, when it comes to them, the IDP administrators using this system, first of all, they log in the future with the same front page you have, so they push the same administrator login button. We simply realize that they are just an IDP administrator, don't have the NRO role, so they get to see a bit less of the system. If you want to see both roles, well, you are the NRO administrator, you can at any time invite yourself and use the system also in the IDP role, just to get a taste of it and be able to explain people how it works. So nothing stops you from just playing around and doing it yourself. As a matter of fact, the NRO of Luxembourg here in Restena, we are just about short of 20 people here. So we are a small organization. And as soon as we've put Azure Managed IDP into production, I gave up on our small little radio server that I had to take care about every day. And I've put all of our users into Managed IDP, and I'm using it as our production IDP since a very long time now. So if you're small, this is also something you can do if you want to. So just rethink who would benefit from having an easier time managing the infrastructure. Now, I'm not going to talk about how an IDP administrator uses the system because that has its own workflows about user provisioning and so on. So if you want to see how an IDP administrator sees the system and how they use it, we have pre-recorded a webcast on this exact topic. So if you go to this link down here, and I'm sure we can also share this link after the webinar, you can see a 40-minute, I think, introduction on how to use the system as an IDP admin. So let's just stop on the IDP level here and just say, if you have further questions on the IDP part of things, please watch the webcast, and you can always get back to us on the usual channels to ask for details there. Now we're nearing the end. There are some things you might want to be doing even after you've provisioned your IDPs. You should take a look at them. Did they actually redeem the invitation token? Do they have users? What is their realm in edurealm? These are typical questions you might want to have. So if you want to see your federation in action as an NRO, you can again log into the federation overview page. And then in a very soon future update, you will see this page here. So actually, we always had the list of institutions which are signed up to Managed IDP. We have very recently added in the code base that you at one glance see what is actually the realm that they have in edurealm. So on this page, you immediately see if there is an abuse report coming in about a certain realm, let's say 14-12 Luxembourg hosted@eduroam.org, you can immediately see, oh, right, this is the IDP I created for test accounts. I'm responsible for those myself. That is something you see on one glance. You can also add and remove administrators here. If you have sent an invitation which is not yet redeemed, it would also pop up on the same page saying, okay, this is an invitation, it expires in 2 hours or something. And then you have a good overview of who is using your system inside your NRO yourself. And that basically covers a lot. Now, there are some things you may have to do at some point in time. We've seen this happening over time, that people have set up something in Eduroam Cat and they manage the system. And then they changed the jobs and just went away, but they're the only administrator of this organization in Eduroam Cat. So the organization kind of goes orphan. If these things happen, you as the NRO admin can also appoint new administrators for the same organization, and you can delete the old person as soon as you realize they've gone away. And if you are not an administrator yourself, you can also take control of this institution and say, right, I want to go into the IDP administrator role now because nobody's responding, and I want to delete a user because there was an abuse report, and so on. So with this interface, you can actually have all of the workflows you need available via some simple buttons. And this allows you to control your deployment. And to be honest, that's pretty much it. There could be one more screenshot about statistics, but you also know that from Eduroam Cat. You can see how many institutions you have in terms of numbers, how many installers have been downloaded for them, and so on. So that's nothing new, actually. The only real difference between Eduroam Cat and Managed IDP on the technical side is that what we deliver with Cat is an installer which is for the institution, and the user types in a username and password locally. But since we have nothing of that, Eduroam Cat instead produces an installer for the individual and well, computes a client certificate, and that comes included in the installer. So these are personal installers. On Eduroam Cat, you get per institution installers for different purposes. But many of the workflows and technicalities are the same. So I'm pretty sure pretty much nothing should surprise you when you log into Managed IDP. It all looks very familiar. Well, and to be honest, with that, I'm pretty much done with my slide deck. So thanks for listening so far. And now I'll be very happy to answer the questions in the chat window, or anything, or any questions you may have just by unmuting your mic and asking.
Thank you, Stefan. There was a lot of information there to share, and we're aware of that. And as I mentioned at the start, we will share the recording of the webinar. We will share the slides. Is it okay to do so, Stefan, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so we shall share the slides and also all the links and references that have been mentioned. You will have them as well available to you, as well as the webcast for administrators. Yeah, so we will put all together in one place and share with all the participants and also people who registered but haven't been able to attend. I'm saying this because there was a question asked about this in the chat room. Now, Stefan, there's some questions. Right, the first question you might have covered, but hi, somebody's got the mic on. Can you please mute?
Tony, please mute your microphone.
Hi guys, can you mute your mics? Right, sorry about this. Okay, the first question was asked about how does one identify end users in case of abuse?
Yeah, okay, so this basically has to unwind the pseudonymization. So first of all, when abuse happens, it is the Eduroam service provider which gets the actual traffic because that's where the person logged in. And the NRO service provider will be able to see, right, the user who created this mess was username at, and then you actually saw realms, so number-number.country.hosted@urom.org. So since it ends in urom.org, very probably the operations team ourselves, we would get the complaint by the SP, and we would figure out, okay, this is a managed IDP realm, it is in Luxembourg, and the numbers you see are actually identifying the IDP and profile inside the federation. So we also see which organization was the cause of that. We can help the organization by seeing the opaque hash, the long username in the certificate, and can map it to the username that the IDP was giving us in the system. And that's what we can tell the IDP. So the user you called test user 123 was abusing @urom at this and that place, and we got a complaint. It is then the job of the IDP admin himself to realize test user 123, right? That is the account I gave to my mother. So my mother is the guilty one. And that is the step where I said, we only see the double pseudonymized part. So the pseudonym the IDP administrator chooses is a pseudonym. And he has the job of actually knowing who the individual, who the person behind that account is. Of course, administrators may choose to give us real names. We are not asking for them, but usernames are arbitrary. So if I want to call myself Stefan Winter, I call myself Stefan Winter in the system without pseudonymization. Nothing stops you from that. We, as the data processor, basically don't care, because first of all, you could have just made up a name and it's actually not the real name, so we don't know if the information is correct. And we've always told you that we just want to have an opaque identifier. So if you've given us something else, that's your own doing, but we will do the same procedure. We will just tell you, right, there is this user. This is the username you chose in the system. Finding out who the individual is your own job.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from Guy. Guy, would you like to unmute your mic and explain what you would like to know, rather than me reading the question from chat, if it's okay with you?
Sure. And Stefan might have answered some of it by pointing at a webinar, but when we've tried to deploy this, the institutional administrators have found the documentation very hard to follow. And in particular, people who've never encountered certificates as a means of authentication have no idea what's going on. And so my question was really about documentation.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Actually, I have to smile a bit because it's true. Once you hear the word certificate, many people realize they don't have any experience. The good thing in this system here is that you don't actually ever see that there is a certificate involved. We don't use the term. We just say, okay, this is an access which is good until, let's say, 2024, if that's what you configured. The technicalities that there is a certificate involved is something we can document as a footnote or technical detail.
It's not so much that, it's that the question I get asked from the administrator is, where do I put the password? That they're expecting there to be a password and there isn't one. And so the user interface is not intuitive in the sense that it doesn't meet what they're used to with other user interfaces.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, it's in principle a variant of the same thing. If you're used to something that is as complex as a password and you have to choose difficult characters and so on, and you have a place to put them in, the lack of all that, the simplicity involved in not having all that, also can come as a shock. So I take it as we should improve the documentation, and I agree that the NRO level documentation is much better than the IDP admin one. For the meantime, if you could just point people to the webcast and see if that actually explains things to them. To be honest, in the webcast, I also didn't stress that there is no username and password to put into because there is no password. But it at least explains the workflow and what they have to do. And then I take it as a homework to also provide written documentation, which simply says it is much simpler than you think because there is no password.
Okay, thank you. There was a question asked by Arthur Peterson. Arthur, would you like to unmute your mic and share? Okay, if it's not possible, then I can read the question unless you can see it, Stefan, in the chat.
Yeah, I can see it now.
Yeah.
So,
Is there a way to register Pretty Realm for some IDP?
yeah, okay. That is actually a good question. The thing is, this realm is actually not seen by pretty much anybody. So if you're really curious as an end user, during the install time, you will be shown, oh, there is a certificate and the username is blah, 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 at whatever. So that is, it's not a very prominent place. What you can do as an IDP is put your name in the system, and then all the branding we can influence has the name anyway. The realm is kind of a technical necessity for the radius routing, so that the request, wherever you are on the planet, actually ends up at our server. So there's fewer things we can do there. What we can do, and I don't mind if we do, but it takes a bit of code and it's not for today, is to replace the first number, which is the IDP identifier in the system, with a short acronym. The problem with it is, if you use client certificates, the total length of the username is limited to 64 characters. So if you now see that at least the .lu.eduroam.org is fixed, and then you put a really long institution name before that, the usernames pretty much have to get smaller and smaller and smaller, and at some point you end up not having a username anymore. So there are limits to what we can do, but I can certainly see if we can get some new things.
Okay, thank you very much. Then we've got a question from Arnaud. Can an organization use Eduroam managed IDP for visitors or only for members of the organization?
Yeah, again, a very good question. We've been wondering about how we want to position the product. In terms of technical realization, if you decide you want to give an Eduroam account to a person, then the person has Eduroam, whether they're a permanent member of your organization or if they're just a visitor. The Eduroam model basically provides a lot of leeway to IDPs, independently from managed IDP, just for general IDPs. So if you are a university and you have 10,000 students and 200 professors and 5 people who need a short-term access because they have to visit your campus for whatever reason, then it's up to you whether you give these 5 people an Eduroam account on your own Radius server. So it would be undue for us to say, on this system here, you have less flexibility. So I can easily imagine that even a big university with their own Radius infrastructure has these few odd one out users which come to the campus, maybe to do some carpentry. And they are there for a week. They want to give them Eduroam. They don't want to add them to their actual identity management system because they're not actual users. So it's perfectly fine for us if you as an NRO give the big university also an account at Eduroam managed IDP so that they can manage these visitors, short-term people, whatever comes along, which doesn't really fit in your proper user management, to give these Eduroam. So we don't have any reservations there. It's just that we were designing this for small organizations without an IDM, but if you need something besides your main IDM, that's also perfectly fine.
Thank you. Stefan, before we go to the next question, if you can see the further comment from Arthur Peterson, it would be good to have a possibility to put some short acronym of IDP instead of just numbers. I think it would also help in identifying organization in case of abuse. If you have any further comments.
Yeah, so that is something we can do. Let's say 4 or 5 letters. As I explained, the username length is limited in total. Should be fine. We also have a vehicle to do that in Eduroam Cat, so we can transpose that to managed IDP. So I take that as a feature request, and that's something we can do. Yep.
Thank you. The next question from Alexandro. Do we have any limitations related to the supported operating systems?
Yeah, so the limitations we have is we support a number of operating systems, and that's the exact same operating systems that we support with Eduroam Cat. So that's all contemporary Windows, Apple Desktop, Apple iOS, Apple iPad OS, Linux and Chrome OS, and Android, of course. So all of those are supported. If you have a user and they say they want to bring their PlayStation online, then we have to say, sorry, that's not what it's meant for.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question from Edward. Edward, you've got the mic. Would you like to explain what you would like to know?
Yeah, sure. Yes, Stefan, I just wanted to be sure that there's no possibility of a charge being applied for this service to NROs in the future. Will it always be free?
Yeah, so I think I alluded to this point slightly during the presentation by saying we are happy to accommodate you on our cloud hosted solution with up to 10,000 users. That's a commitment we can make. We've thought a long time about how much operations can we sustain, because it's a bit more heavy lifting at your own cat. That limit will, in the end, and all of the future I can foresee will be free because it's just a parallel service to CAT, and that's just something we do for the community. If you become a very happy user beyond the 10,000 end user accounts, we'll have to see how we do it. It doesn't have to be money involved. There could be that you just take the radio server load off of us and so on. There were some options we discussed earlier. So if you grow really big with this, we can't guarantee, but we also don't have a plan because this hasn't happened yet. And we will see about that as we go along. Other than that, I think I can say that managed IDP will be free on our side as at your operations, as long as at your cat will be free.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. And do you see the managed IDP service continuing for a long time in the future? I mean, there's no possibility that Géant would withdraw it after sort of 3 or 4 years. I guess it will continue for as long as CAT will continue.
Yeah, so that's the idea. I mean, we will see about the uptake, and we already have 20 NROs which are signed up to the system, so we see it is being used. If we were to discover, for the last 2 years, we were 2 users and nothing else, at some point we might think of discontinuing it, but I don't see any of that happening.
Okay, thank you. You know, if we encourage our smaller organizations to make use of this, then obviously we need to say it will be available for, many, many years. Anyway, thank you for your answer.
Okay, thank you very much. Just again, continuing, just before we take up the next question, further comment from Arthur. Maybe IDP administrator may even be allowed to choose between 1 automatic generation of some number-based name or 2 input short acronym. If you want to comment, Stefan, but I just want to share it, the comment with everyone.
I can only comment that this is exactly how it would be, yeah. So if you look at your own CAT, it already allows you to choose an acronym for the installer name, and that same acronym you can configure in CAT would be also used for the realm. And if you don't, you would just use the number.
Thank you very much. I think we can move on to the next question. I hope I pronounced the first name correctly. Is it Wenshi?
I think it's Venka, actually. I know Venka, so
yeah.
I just saw the question.
Okay.
So the backend is free values, that's correct. So we use free values 3, of course. And this is a separate GitHub repo. So there is a generator script which generates the config for the 200 NRO, the very long list. And we've put that in a separate repository. So if Irina would remind me after the webinar to tell her the repository name on GitHub, we can include that in the materials.
Let me just make a note. Yeah. Okay. Next, thank you. Next question from Martin Stanislav. Do the involved parties like Géant and NRO, IDP need to sign a separate data process and data control agreements to be able to offer and use the described service?
Yeah, that's an excellent question from Martin, actually. Yeah, we've been, as I said, we've been thinking about GDPR a lot during the design phase with privacy by design and so on. And we also realized that an agreement is needed between the IdP, which is the one who is controlling the data, and us who are processing it. So with the choice of words, I gave it away. So when you sign up as an IdP and before you can create your first user, you are presented with a click-through terms of use, which we think is enough of a contract in the GDPR sense, which establishes that the IdP is in the role of the data controller, and we, as the ones operating the service, which means Rand, is the one who is a data processor for the data we're being given. And since that's a click-through, and I have to accept, we think that this is enough of a basis. We haven't been told otherwise so far. We have a legal team in Giant looking at these things, so I think we are good there. When it comes to the NRO pretty much doesn't reveal any useful data to us that would be voluntary. So, I mean, as the NRO, you have to tell the eduroam operations about the names of the institutions you connect by means of the eduroam database. So having this information is necessary to have the contract with you going. So that's pre-established, and you use the same mechanism in eduroam cat. So yes, for the IdP level, for the NRO level, I don't think a separate agreement is needed. And again, nobody told us so. So I think we're covered there.
Thank you very much. Next question from Neil. And, it's really great to have the global audience with us. So the question from Neil is the fully Giant hosted service available globally? In Australia, there is at least one institution that wishes to use managed IdP.
Yeah, so thanks for that question. I guess I didn't explicitly say it. I sometimes forgot this, let's say, trivialities or the general outset. Just like with eduroam cat, we've created this for the entirety of all the NROs. So come along and use it, and that's it. So long as you stay below the 10,000 users, as we've previously discussed, you can just use it and it will just work. What you as Australia might take a look at when you first use it in small scale maybe is, so far our actual radio servers for the authentications are hosted in Europe. So you may want to take a look at round trip time. But if there is a problem there and we want to and we should position a radio server in the APAC region, then we can also always do that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Neil, for your question. I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I think we really have time for one more question, which is timed it all perfectly, from Helen. Well, this is good for organized small institutions with a domain and maybe an administrator, but how about individual users, researchers, and visitors with only their Gmail, Yahoo addresses, but with no institutional email addresses, but would like to use the service?
Yeah, so what you've seen today, the sign up for the IdP admins requires an email address, but it doesn't have to be an institutional one even. I would typically expect even small organizations have a domain, but if they don't have and they're just sitting on Gmail, that's fine. You just send the invitation to Gmail. What is needed, however, is that the individual researcher has to be part of the research and education scene. So it is, after all, the NRO which allows you to issue or allows you to become an IdP in the system. So the NRO has to know about you. If you just say, my name is John, I would like to use eduroam, but there is no known and visible affiliation with research and education, as an NRO, you are expected to say, no, sorry, you have to be with an organization of any kind. That can be a small organization. Here in Luxembourg, we have an institute which has 4 persons, and they're happily using managed IdP. So that's perfectly fine. But as an individual, you first have to be affiliated with an IdP in the first place. Whether your email address is then one on Gmail or Yahoo, or if you want to get your end user credential sent via SMS instead, that doesn't matter. But you have to be affiliated with research and education as an end user.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I hope, Helen, we answered your question, but if not, just pop something further comments in the chat. Right,
The
okay.
answer is
There's
right.
one. Sorry, Helen.
I was saying the answer is right. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Well, we almost out of time, but I can see one more comment from, oh, two more questions coming in. Have we got time? Is it okay for you, Stefan, to take two more questions?
Yeah, I mean, as long as people want to stay in the room, we can go on forever. But maybe let me first answer the last one from Emmanuel first, because that's fairly simple. So in EduRoam, we use the generic term national roaming operator. In many countries, the National Research and Education Network, the NREN, is the NRO, so there is no difference. There are countries where the NREN might have outsourced that to a separate company, and then there is a distinction between NRO and NREN. But for most intents and purposes, when I wrote EduRoam NRO, I meant the NREN. And then we have this question from Neil, and yeah, there are some specifics about it. So as I said, we operate this as best practice. We are also particularly aware of fragmentation issues. Those of you who do use client certificates in their daily operations probably have seen the problem that client certificates are so big on the network that they sometimes get stuck if you have a problem with UDP fragmentation on the network. It's a very specific technical topic, so never mind if you can't follow. But for the benefit of Neil, we use client certificates which use elliptic curve cryptography. And with that, the client certificates are small enough to fit in one UDP datagram. So fragmentation is not a problem for our service. eTLS in general is sometimes problematic, yes, but we've designed the system so that it just barely scrapes along and doesn't be affected by that. And for the rest, with framed NTU and so on, let's take this offline. That's getting a bit too densely technical.
Okay, thanks, Stefan.
Thank you very much. One more question, Stefan, from Guy, or is it a comment?
I think Guy was explaining that there is sometimes an NRO stepping up to do EduRoam in a country before there is an NREN. And yes, that's also where there will be a difference between the two notions. But as I said, in practice, it doesn't matter, actually.
Well, I think we are slightly over the time, but as long as it's okay with everyone, that's fine. It's important to answer questions and hear the comments. And also, I think, thank you very much for everyone for your time, for taking part and for asking questions. And I think to me, it's just shows the great diversity which is out there, and a great service. But I think the question is for people how it will apply or translate to kind of my environment, and this is where the further conversations may take place. And for these conversations to take place, we will provide everyone, as I mentioned before, all the reference materials, support materials, contact details, so you can have the direct conversation or raise very specific issues relevant to your particular environment. And this is the whole purpose of the webinar, to have these dialogues going, or to start these conversations. So that's it from me. Stefan, any final remarks from you?
I would just say goodbye.
In that case, thank you very much indeed. Oh, there's one more question from Togo. In case you have your own AD, are you able to connect to the servers? Is there a quick answer to that one?
Quick answer, no. So as soon as you have your own AD, you can also have a radio server, basically. So we're doing the system to be independent from any IDM backend.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I can see people leaving the room. So before we log off, just a huge final thanks to Stefan and to all the participants and all your questions and attention and comments. And we will be in touch with follow-up information. So if you think of something else, in the meantime, you will have the contact details and the channels of communication to ask you further questions. With that in mind, I'm ending up the meeting and saying thank you very much to everyone, and have a good day, whichever part of the world, or evening, whichever part of the world you are, and you know where we are, so get in touch for any further conversations. So thank you.
Thanks, Stefan. Thanks, Aaron.